You're standing in a settlement of 200 people on Greenland's western coast, and the wind coming off the ice sheet sounds like something breathing. The buildings are painted in colors that seem absurd against the white and gray, reds and yellows and blues that make the whole place look like a children's toy scattered across permafrost. Inside the community center, there's a meeting happening. Has been happening for 3 hours now. Outside, the temperature is dropping toward -20 Celsius, but no one is leaving. On the wall hangs a flag you've seen your entire life, red and white, the Danish Dannebrog, the colors of a country 3,600 kilometers away across the Atlantic, a place most of the people in this room have never visited and never will. Someone is speaking in hbaalive, the indigenous language, but the official documents being discussed are in Danish. Always in Danish. The translator is doing her best, but some concepts don't translate cleanly, and you watch her hesitate over words that mean different things depending on who's saying them and why. Sovereignty, autonomy, partnership, self-determination. In the back of the room, a young man is staring at his phone, at news reports from January 2026 about the American president saying anything less than US control of Greenland is unacceptable, about his aide's wife posting a map of Greenland covered with the American flag captioned "Soon," about Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers flying to Washington for emergency talks. The question no one is asking out loud, but everyone is thinking, is this: how did 56,000 people end up as bargaining chips in a game between empires? And why does the country that claims to protect them keep making decisions as if they're not in the room? You think you understand this story. Climate change melting the ice cap, opening shipping routes and exposing rare earth minerals. An American president who wanted to buy Greenland, making international headlines. Arctic geopolitics, the new Cold War between superpowers competing for strategic territory. You believe this is about resources and military bases, about great powers making rational calculations in a changing world. And that's all true. But what you haven't been told is how this arrangement, a nation of 5.9 million controlling an island 50 times larger with a population 1% its size, isn't a historical accident, but a deliberately maintained relationship that benefits everyone except the people actually living there. This is a story about how colonial relationships survive by rebranding themselves as partnerships, how autonomy becomes a carefully managed illusion, and how the language of protection justifies control that would be called occupation if it happened anywhere else. By the end, you'll understand why Greenland's future isn't being decided in Nuuk or Washington, but in Copenhagen, in rooms where the people most affected have never had a meaningful voice. Welcome to History Brought Alive, where forgotten stories rise from the ashes and legends walk again. Like, subscribe and follow for more interesting history stories brought alive. Denmark is a constitutional monarchy of 5.9 million people, a nation that consistently ranks among the world's happiest, most democratic, most progressive societies. It's the kind of country that projects soft power through humanitarian aid, climate action, and social welfare policies that other nations study as models. And it controls an Arctic territory of 2.1 million square kilometers, the world's largest island, with a population it has systematically shaped for 3 centuries while insisting the relationship is voluntary. This isn't ancient history buried in archives. This is ongoing policy. The colonial period began in 1721 when Norwegian missionary Hans Egede, with support from the United Kingdom of Denmark-Norway, arrived in Greenland expecting to find Norse settlers who needed to be converted from Catholicism to Lutheranism following the Reformation. He found instead only the Inuit, who had long since established themselves across most of the island. Egede decided to focus his efforts on converting them to Christianity. That decision marked the beginning of 3 centuries of Danish colonial rule. Denmark established a trade monopoly that made Greenland economically dependent on Copenhagen. In 1776, the Danish government assumed full monopoly of trade with Greenland. The coast was closed to foreign access, it remained closed until 1950. For 174 years, Greenlanders couldn't trade with anyone except Denmark, couldn't leave the island without permission, couldn't make decisions about their own resources or governance. When Denmark and Norway separated in 1814 under the Treaty of Kiel following the Napoleonic Wars, Denmark retained Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, Denmark consolidated control while other powers showed interest. In 1916, Denmark's rights to Greenland were confirmed by the United States as part of a deal facilitating America's purchase of the Danish West Indies for $25 million. A controversy concerning Norwegian claims to eastern Greenland ended in 1933 when the Permanent Court of International Justice, founded by the League of Nations, ruled against Norway and affirmed Danish sovereignty. After World War II, when the wave of decolonization dismantled European empires across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, Denmark made a calculated adjustment. The United Nations pushed for decolonization. In 1953, Denmark amended its constitution and changed Greenland's status from colony to county, an integral part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Not independent, not sovereign, just upgraded within the Danish realm. Greenlanders were granted Danish citizenship and 2 seats in the Danish Parliament's 179 members, 1.1% representation for a territory that comprises 98% of Denmark's total land area. The language shifted from subjugation to integration. The official narrative became one of protection and partnership. Denmark wasn't exploiting Greenland. It was modernizing it, providing infrastructure, healthcare, education that Greenlanders couldn't afford independently. The annual subsidy, currently approximately $600 million, or 3.9 billion Danish kroner, was presented as generosity, proof of Denmark's commitment to its Arctic territory. But what looked like partnership from Copenhagen looked different from Nuuk. Because the subsidy came with conditions never explicitly stated, but always enforced. Denmark controlled Greenland's foreign policy, its defense, its currency, its legal system. Any attempt by Greenland to negotiate directly with other nations required Danish approval. Any mining project, infrastructure development, economic agreement needed Copenhagen's consent. The relationship wasn't between equals. It was between metropolitan power and dependent territory, dressed in the language of mutual benefit. In the 1950s and 1960s, Denmark launched what it called modernization reforms. The campaign was presented as bringing Greenland into the 20th century, improving living standards, creating opportunities. The reality was forced cultural assimilation. The Danish government pressured Greenlanders to abandon the migratory hunter lifestyle that had sustained them for over 6 centuries and relocate to larger cities. There were 160 small settlements in 1950. Danish planners decided to consolidate the population into the 4 largest cities: Nuuk, Sisimiut, Maniitsoq, and Paamut. People were evicted from their communities, moved into housing they didn't choose, in cities where traditional skills had no value and modern employment opportunities didn't exist for people whose education had been neglected for generations. Little effort was made to manage the transition. The predictable consequences followed: social disruption, unemployment, alcoholism, domestic violence, the complete pattern seen on displaced indigenous populations globally. To this day, Greenland suffers from suicide rates 7 times higher than the United States and among the highest in the world. Danish doctors conducted a campaign in the 1960s and 1970s to insert IUDs in Inuit women and girls, sometimes without consent or knowledge, often targeting children as young as 12 or 13. The program was justified as family planning, as helping Greenlanders control population growth. When the full scope was uncovered by Danish media in 2022, The scandal revealed that thousands of Greenlandic women had been sterilized or fitted with contraceptive devices without informed consent. The Danish government had never acknowledged this as forced sterilization, had never offered meaningful accountability. The psychological and cultural trauma persists. Many adults in Greenland today are still affected by these traumas. They watched their parents break down, saw communities destroyed, experienced firsthand how Danish modernization meant erasing everything that made them Greenlandic. And such social damage passes down through generations. The assumption in Copenhagen was straightforward. Greenlanders needed to become more Danish to succeed in the modern world. That their language was primitive, their culture was dying, their traditional ways incompatible with progress. So children were educated in Danish, not hbaalive. Government operations were conducted in Danish. Economic opportunities required Danish fluency. The message was clear, even if unspoken. To matter, to have value, Greenlanders had to stop being themselves and become acceptable to Copenhagen. This wasn't malice, it was policy. A genuine belief that assimilation served Greenlandic interests, that Denmark knew better how Greenlanders should live than Greenlanders themselves. And for decades, that assumption went largely unchallenged, because the power imbalance made challenge futile. This wasn't cruelty, it was civilizing mission, 1950s edition. Growing demands for autonomy led to a referendum in January 1979. Greenlanders voted for Home Rule, which was implemented on May 1, 1979. The arrangement created a Greenlandic parliament and transferred control over education, healthcare, and some economic policy to local government. Denmark retained control over foreign affairs, defense, and constitutional matters. The assumption in Copenhagen was that Greenlanders wanted more control over daily life, but understood independence was economically impossible. That given a choice between sovereignty and survival, they would choose survival. That the subsidy created dependency so total the relationship would continue indefinitely, just with better optics. So Denmark agreed to Home Rule, confident it was conceding symbolic authority while retaining control of what actually mattered. For 20 years, that assumption held. Greenland's government focused on local issues. Talk of independence remained abstract, aspirational. Then the ice started melting, not metaphorically, literally. Climate change began transforming Greenland from frozen liability into resource-rich asset. The ice sheet, covering 80% of the island's surface, began retreating, exposing minerals that had been inaccessible. Rare earth elements essential for batteries and electronics, graphite, lithium, cobalt, uranium, potentially massive oil and gas reserves offshore. The Northwest Passage, a shipping route through the Arctic that reduces travel time between Europe and Asia by thousands of miles, became navigable for longer periods each year. And suddenly, Greenland wasn't a dependency Denmark maintained out of historical obligation. It was strategic territory major powers were willing to compete for. China started investing in mining operations and infrastructure. Between 2012 and 2019, Chinese companies pursued projects in Greenland, including rare earth mining at Kvanefjeld, iron ore extraction, and airport construction. The United States, which had maintained Thule Air Base, now Pituffik Space Base, since World War II, expanded operations and increased strategic focus on the Arctic. In 2004, Denmark renewed the defense agreement with the United States concerning Greenland, allowing upgrade of missile defense systems at Thule. This time, the agreement was also signed by Greenland's government, acknowledging its growing role. And Denmark, which had spent decades treating Greenland as financial burden requiring $600 million annually, began talking about its Arctic territory as national priority, as Denmark's gateway to great power status, as essential to Danish identity and security. The pivot was seamless. Copenhagen didn't change its policies, it changed its rhetoric. The subsidy wasn't charity anymore. It was investment in Denmark's Arctic future. The restrictions on Greenlandic autonomy weren't colonial holdovers. They were necessary protections against exploitation by foreign powers. And the relationship itself was reframed as partnership benefiting both sides equally, allowing Greenland to modernize while maintaining cultural identity, providing security in an increasingly dangerous region. To Danish politicians, this wasn't hypocrisy. It was adaptation. The relationship had always been transactional. Only the transaction had changed. This wasn't manipulation. It was miscalculation about what Greenlanders actually wanted. The person you need to understand isn't a politician or activist. It's the teacher in a settlement of 400 who grew up speaking hbaalive at home and Danish at school, who was told her language was primitive and her culture was dying, who watched as Danish became the language of opportunity and hbaalive became the language of poverty and marginalization. She learned to code switch, to perform gratitude that made Danish administrators comfortable, to navigate a system requiring her to become less Greenlandic to succeed. And she did succeed, got educated in Denmark, returned home with qualifications making her valuable to local government, married, had children she's trying to raise with some connection to traditions nearly eradicated. She is exactly the kind of person the integration policy was designed to create. Economically secure, politically moderate, invested in the existing system. But something shifted. Not because of a speech or movement, but because her daughter came home from school asking why they had to learn Danish if they were Greenlandic. And she didn't have a good answer. The answer she'd been given her entire life. That Danish was the language of education, opportunity, the modern world, sounded hollow when spoken aloud. It was just another way of saying that to matter, to have value, Greenlanders had to stop being themselves and become acceptable to Copenhagen. The realization didn't make her radical. It made her tired. Tired of performing gratitude for subsidies that came with invisible strings. Tired of autonomy requiring permission. Tired of watching her government negotiate with Denmark as if they were equals when every conversation ended with Copenhagen having veto power. She doesn't want revolution. She wants dignity. The ability to make decisions about her home without those decisions requiring approval from a government that has never understood her culture and spent 3 centuries trying to erase it. And when Denmark points to the subsidy, to the $600 million annually, to the infrastructure, to the impossibility of economic independence, she hears the same argument colonizers have always made. That the colonized are incapable of self-governance, that control is for their own good, that the alternative is chaos and poverty. She knows independence would be hard. She knows the economy, with GDP of only $3.24 billion and a population of 56,000 spread across a territory larger than Mexico, isn't ready. But she also knows that every year Greenland remains dependent is another year Copenhagen gets to make that argument. Another year, the psychological infrastructure of colonialism gets reinforced. Standard pressure doesn't work on people who've stopped believing the system serves them. You can't buy compliance from someone who's concluded the price is their identity. In November 2008, Greenlanders voted on a referendum for expanded self-governance. Turnout was 72%. Support was 75%. The Self-Government Act, implemented June 21, 2009, significantly expanded Greenland's authority. The legislation recognized Greenlanders as a people pursuant to international law with the right of self-determination. It granted control over natural resources, policing, justice system, civil aviation, and made hbaalive the sole official language. It established a pathway to independence if Greenlanders chose it through referendum. Denmark would continue providing the annual block grant, but it would gradually decrease as Greenland's resource revenues increased. In exchange, Denmark retained authority over foreign policy, defense, and monetary policy. On paper, it looked like compromise satisfying everyone. Greenland got more autonomy. Denmark retained ultimate control. The relationship could continue indefinitely as long as both sides pretended the contradictions didn't exist. But the expanded self-governance created a paradox. Greenland now had legal right to negotiate mining contracts, but Denmark controlled foreign policy, meaning major foreign investments still required approval from Copenhagen. Greenland could theoretically choose independence, but doing so would eliminate the subsidy, which currently funds approximately 50% of government budget and represents 18 to 20% of total GDP, immediately collapsing the Sur's economy. The autonomy was real. The dependency was absolute. Both things were true simultaneously, and both Danish and Greenlandic politicians understood this arrangement couldn't last indefinitely. But neither knew how to change it without triggering consequences. Neither could control. And then everything changed, not because Denmark or Greenland made a choice, but because the ice started melting.